One down, 24 to go. From Russia with Love. We have made it to one of everyone's favorite Bond films. I feel like with this one I can kind of get right into it more, rather than going into the background of who everybody is, because much of the production, crew, and cast remain the same. This is one I'm really excited to cover since it is thought of very fondly not only from the fans, but from cast and crew, and even the producers themselves. In many ways, From Russia with Love established many of the Bond tropes and built upon what Dr. No had already built, even if we weren't quite all the way there yet with the established formula. But there's many reasons why From Russia with Love is so beloved amongst the Bond community. But have you ever wondered just how this beloved film got off the ground? Let's deep dive into 1963's From Russia with Love. Even with their years of success in the film industry, both Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman were well aware that many film series faltered or stalled when it came to the second film in a series. Determined not to allow the series to fall into that same trap, they determined early on that if a follow-up to Dr. No were to be made, they would adapt the 1957 novel From Russia with Love. Following the glowing success of Dr. No, which made $59.5 million on a $1 million budget worldwide at the box office, United Artists greenlit a sequel and doubled the budget from $1 million to $2 million for the producers. Sean Connery was also due to return as Bond and was awarded a bonus of $100,000 to go along with his $54,000 salary. The President of the United States at this time was John F. Kennedy. JFK had done an interview with Life magazine and had named From Russia with Love among his 10 favorite books of all time, which heavily influenced Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman to choose this novel as the follow-up to Dr. No, with the comma from the novel's title being dropped from the film's official title. From Russia with Love just so happened to be the final film JFK would view in the White House on November 20th, 1963, before that fateful day in Dallas 2 days later. Most of the crew from Dr. No was slated to return and did end up returning for From Russia with Love, with a couple of exceptions. The major change with the cast and crew began with production designer Ken Adam opting to work on Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove instead, and he was replaced by Sid Cain, the uncredited art director on Dr. No. Cain had previously worked with Broccoli before Dr. No was made, having connections to him when he worked at Warwick Films for Broccoli and Irving Allen. Cain had been uncredited in Dr. No, and as a result of this mistake, Broccoli gifted him a solid gold pen since it would have been too expensive to recreate the title sequence of Dr. No. When it came to From Russia with Love, Cain designed a $150,000 set for a chess match seen at the beginning of the film, and this set repeated the chess pawn design throughout the room. He would work on 4 Bond movies total, helping to create some of the gadgets the series would become known for. Title designer Maurice Binder was replaced by Robert Brownjohn. Brownjohn had showed a promise from an early age in his artistic talents and skills, and eventually gained a background in graphic design, becoming a protege under Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and his successor, Serge Chermayeff. Side note, if I mispronounce any of these names wrong, please correct me on the pronunciation down in the comments. I got a little bit of flack for that in my Dr. No video, and I mean no disrespect to the names or places I pronounce wrong. After receiving a non-professional Bachelor of Arts degree in 1948, Brownjohn had initially worked as an architectural planner in Chicago before returning to the Institute of Design, also in Chicago, to assist Chermayeff and teach some of his own courses. He worked as a freelance designer for magazines such as Esquire and Coronet, among others. Brownjohn's career spanned from New York City to London in the ensuing years, working within the music industry as well, for record companies like Columbia Records, since he was a major fan of jazz music. He was approached in 1963 by the producers after disagreements with Maurice Binder forced Binder to leave the film, and Brownjohn was hired to create the title sequence for the film. His work started the tradition of scantily clad women in Bond films as title sequences. John Barry was hired to replace Monty Norman as the composer of the film, and even created a new secondary Bond theme called 007, featured in 4 other Bond films in addition to From Russia with Love. You know this theme? Yep, that's the one, and you know something was about to happen and about to go down whenever that popped on. The film introduced several conventions the series would adopt and become known for, described by many as essential to the series. These were a pre-title sequence, the Blofeld character, credited as Spectre's number 1 and referred to such throughout the film, and the actor portraying Blofeld referred to as question mark in the film's end credits, a secret weapon gadget for Bond, a helicopter sequence, a post-script action sequence after the main climax, a theme song with lyrics, and the line "James Bond will return" or "will be back" in the credits. Fleming's original novel was a Cold War thriller, but because the producers had decided not to mix political commentary into the movies, the undercover Soviet agency SMERSH was replaced with the crime syndicate Spectre, with Spectre seeking revenge against Bond for the death of Dr. No. Another reason the producers changed up the villains from the novel is because they were attempting to put an end to the Cold War, so they didn't want Bond's main enemy to be Russian. The original screenwriter was Len Dayton, but he was replaced because of a lack of progress on the script, writing only about 35 pages before he was let go. Because of Dayton's lack of progress on the script, the 2 writers from Dr. No, Joanna Harwood and Richard Maibaum, returned to pen the script. However, there would be conflicting reports as to who actually wrote the script. Some sources state that Harwood was credited only for the adaptation due to her suggestions, and Maibaum had carried over her ideas into his script. Harwood was known to contribute to the scripts of most of Harry Saltzman's projects, but departed the scripting process due to director Terence Young's constant rewriting of her screenplay and trying to incorporate ideas that weren't in Fleming's original work, as Harwood had written the screenplay to mirror the novel or stay as close to the novel as possible. Maibaum kept making rewrites as filming progressed. Red Grant was added to the Istanbul scenes just before the crew's visit to Turkey, and this brought more focus and attention to the Spectre plot, including a plot point where Grant started saving Bond's life. A late change to the screenplay during shooting was that Grant killed the bespectacled spy at Hagia Sophia instead of Bond, who finds the man dead instead. For the last quarter of the movie, Maibaum decided to add 2 chases, which included speedboats and helicopters, and also managed to change the final confrontation with Bond in Rosa Klebb from Paris to Venice. Throughout the whole scripting process, uncredited rewrites were done by Berkeley Mather, who also worked on Dr. No, and who would go on to do uncredited rewrites on the next Bond film, Goldfinger. With an actor locked into the role of James Bond and Sean Connery, the producers did not have to worry about doing an extensive search for the actor to portray the title character, and instead had to focus on the supporting cast. The actor who played number 1 was Anthony Dawson, the actor who had played Professor Dent in the previous film, and Dawson would go uncredited for his role as number 1, as he was an actor who had appeared in many of Terence Young's films anyways. Number 1 is, of course, the head of Spectre, Ernst Stavro Blofeld, but Blofeld was credited as just a question mark in the end credits. To dub over Blofeld's line, Viennese actor Eric Pullman was hired, and his dub is the dub you hear in the final cut. Series stalwart Desmond Llewellyn made his series debut in this film as Major Boothroyd, who became known as Q. Though Peter Burton had played the role in the previous film, he was unavailable to return, leading to the now iconic casting of Llewellyn, who would go on to play Q for another 16 installments in the series until his death in 1999. Despite the recast, Llewellyn was omitted from the opening title sequence and is instead credited in the end credits of the film, credited simply as Boothroyd. Boothroyd is not referred to by name at all in any of the dialogue, but M does introduce him as being from Q Branch. There were several actresses considered for the role of Tatiana Romanova, including, but not limited to, Italian actresses Silvia Cosina and Virna Lisi, Danish actress Annette Vadin, Polish actress Magda Konopka, Swedish actress Pia Lindström, and English actress Tanja Malay. I know, a lot of actresses. Elga Gimba Andersson was initially hired for the role, but refused to participate in the film after refusing to have sex with a United Artists employee. Good for her. Eventually, 1960 Miss Universe runner-up Daniela Bianchi was cast, supposedly at the suggestion of Sean Connery. Daniela Bianchi would be the youngest Bond girl ever to be cast, as she was only 21 at the time of her casting. Bianchi had to start taking English classes for the role, since she didn't know any English, but the producers would decide to have her lines redubbed by English actress Barbara Jefford, known mostly as a stage actress. The scene in which Bond finds Tatiana in his bed in the hotel room was used as the screen test, with Dawson standing in as Bond. This now famous scene would go on to become the traditional screen test scene for James Bond actors and Bond girls. Greek actress Katina Paxinou was considered for the role of Rosa Klebb, but was unavailable. Terence Young cast Austrian singer Lotte Lenya after hearing of her musical recordings. Lenya was born in 1898 and came from a classical musical background, and aside from playing Rosa Klebb, is best remembered for the performances of her first husband's songs. Because of the rise of Nazism in Germany, she left the country even though she was not Jewish, as she became estranged from her first husband. While they eventually divorced, they would also eventually remarry and settled in New York City in September 1935. It wasn't until late in her career that she transitioned into acting, eventually being nominated for Best Supporting Actress in the 1961 film The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone. Young had wanted to cast Kronstein next, and sought an actor with a remarkable face to portray Kronstein so that he could be well remembered by audiences. Because of this requirement by Terence Young, Vladek Shibal was cast in the role. Shibal was initially hesitant to accept the role, but was convinced to partake in the film by Sean Connery's girlfriend, Diane Salento. Several women were considered for the roles of Vida and Zora, the gypsy fighting girls, and after Eliza Uar and Martine Beswick were cast, the two actresses spent 6 weeks practicing their fighting choreography with stunt work arranger Peter Perkins. Interestingly, Martine Beswick was listed in the opening credits for the film, but her name was erroneously misspelled, being referred to as Martin Beswick. This was eventually fixed for all future home media releases beginning in 2001 with the DVD release. A strong contender for the role of Red Grant was Joe Robinson, but the role was instead given to Robert Shaw. Robinson still wouldn't define the blonde henchman that many later films in the series became known for, but Robert Shaw would be cast and go on to define that trope. He would later be known for his role as Quint in the 1975 blockbuster Jaws. He initially turned down the role of Red Grant, reading the script and calling it rubbish. His then wife convinced him to take the part. Seems to be a common theme with these actors who are hesitant or turn it down initially. Mexican actor Pedro Armendáriz was recommended to Young by director John Ford to play Karen Bay. Unfortunately for Armendáriz, this would be the final film of his illustrious career. In 1956, Armendáriz had a role in The Conqueror, which was produced by Howard Hughes. It was filmed in Utah at a time when the U.S. government was conducting atmospheric nuclear testing in the neighboring state of Nevada. Within 25 years, 91 of the 220 people involved in that film's production, a whopping 41% of all cast and crew, developed cancer, 46 of which died from complications of cancer related to the nuclear testing. Armendáriz had begun to suffer major pain in his hips, and years later it was discovered that he had neck cancer. He learned his condition was terminal and inoperable while at UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles. All of this coming after experiencing this pain while filming on location in Istanbul. Because Armandaris was so ill, filming was terminated in Istanbul, and the production moved to Britain so that Armandaris' scenes could be brought forward for him to complete without delay. Though visibly in pain, he worked on the film for as long as he could. Even though he was terminally ill during the shooting of the film, the reason Armandaris had accepted the role of Kerim Bey was to ensure his family had the financial resources that were necessary in case of his death. When he could no longer work, he returned home. Remaining shots needed of Armandaris were filmed in London and used with stand-ins and a stunt double, one stand-in being Terence Young himself. On June 18, 1963, Armandaris smuggled a gun into the hospital, pointed it at his chest, and pulled the trigger. Armandaris was 51 years old. Filming began on April 1st, 1963 at Pinewood Studios in London, and shortly thereafter, production moved to Istanbul, Turkey. The reason production began first at Pinewood was to shoot Armandaris' scenes first since he was so ill, with director Terence Young standing in for Armandaris in some scenes involving Kerim Bey throughout the last 2 months of production. Since most of the film was set in Istanbul, locations included the Basilica Cistern, the Hagia Sophia, I said it right this time, and Sirkeshi railway station, which also doubled for stations in Belgrade and Zagreb. The most technically challenging and most complicated action scenes were completed in the UK, being filmed at Pinewood Studios, with Pinewood also doubling for the MI6 offices, Spectre Island, the Venice Hotel, and the interior of the Orient Express, with some footage of the exterior of the Orient Express train being filmed as well. While the Orient Express's journey was set in Eastern Europe in the film, the journey itself was actually filmed in Argyll, Scotland, and Switzerland, along with the truck ride. The ending scenes of the movie were shot on the Venice Canal. However, in order for the film to be able to qualify for British film funding, at least 70% of the film had to be shot in Great Britain or in the Commonwealth. The Gypsy Camp was originally meant to be shot on location, but shooting for this scene shifted to Pinewood. I couldn't find any reasons why, but one can probably assume it was because Armandaris was too ill to travel and the scene involved Kerim Bey, as well as 70% of the film having to be shot in Great Britain or the Commonwealth. The scene with the rats, after the theft of the Lecter device, was shot in Spain due to Britain not allowing film productions to use wild rats in their films, and therefore prohibited crews from filming with rats. An attempt to film white rats painted in cocoa in Turkey did not work. Ian Fleming himself was able to spend a week on location in Istanbul to visit the set and tour the city with the producers. Director Terence Young had a strong eye for realism, and that was realized throughout principal photography. For the opening chess match, Kronstein wins the match with a reenactment of Boris Spassky's victory over David Bronstein in 1960. As mentioned before, production designer Sid Kane built up the chess-pawn motif in this sequence, which cost $150,000. Krylenko's death happens inside a billboard for the film Call Me Bwana. Call Me Bwana was another film produced by Eon, so Kane decided to promote the film within this film. Some Inception stuff right there. The attache case given to Bond by Q Branch became one of the most iconic gadgets in Bond film history. The attache case was armed with a tear gas bomb that detonated if the case was improperly opened, a folding AR-7 sniper rifle with 20 rounds of ammunition, a throwing knife, and 50 gold sovereigns. Terence Young also had a background of semi-professional boxing, and due to his boxing background at Cambridge, he choreographed the fight between Bond and Grant with stunt coordinator Peter Perkins. The scene took 3 weeks to film and was considered to be violent enough to make some involved with the production worried, especially since both Shaw and Connery did most of their own stunts for the fight. Young also has gone on record and stated that the Chateau Garden assassination of the fake Bond to open the film was inspired and styled after Last Year at Marienbad. Production experienced some unexpected complications due to the uncredited rewrites by Berkeley Mothard during filming. I tried to do as much digging as possible to find out what exactly Mothard did for uncredited rewrites, but I couldn't find anything. Hunt began to edit the film as key scenes still had to be filmed, which helped to restructure the opening scenes. Hunt and Young devised the idea of moving the Red Grant training sequence to the beginning of the film, prior to the main title. This, ladies and gentlemen, was the first of the many pre-title sequences, a signature feature that would be featured in all subsequent Bond films produced by Eon. No doubt an iconic hallmark in cinematic history. As stated, production was not as smooth sailing, as the film was behind schedule and over budget, and the production crew struggled to complete production in time for the already announced premiere date of October 1963. On July 6, 1963, while scouting filming locations in Argyll, Scotland, to film the boat chase, more on that in a minute, Terence Young's helicopter crashed into the water with art director Michael White and a cameraman on board. The craft sank, but somehow all three managed to escape the crash with minor injuries. A few days later, Bianchi's driver fell asleep during the commute to a 6 a.m. shoot and crashed the car. Bianchi's face had bruises and her scenes had to be delayed for 2 weeks to allow time for her minor bruises and injuries to heal. Man, the death of Armendariz and the two crashes within days of each other, they really went through hell and back to get this movie made. Gotta commend them for that. One of the film's big action set pieces that was filmed at Pinewood Studios was Bond and Red Grant's now iconic fight aboard the Orient Express before production moved to Scotland to film with the helicopter and boat chases around Loch Gilphead. These scenes were not in the source material, but were added to the film to create an action-packed climax for the film. The action moved swiftly and smoothly, which worked wonders for the crew. Peter Hunt returned as editor and employed the same fast editing style he used in Dr. No to give From Russia with Love more kinetic tension and energy. Somehow, though, while filming the boat chase, the speedboats could not go fast enough due to the many waves, and some of the cameras ended up sinking in the Bosphorus. A helicopter was also hard to acquire, and the special effects crew were nearly arrested trying to get one at a local airbase. Sounds like a heist if you ask me. The helicopter scene was also created to be an homage to the Alfred Hitchcock film North by Northwest, which featured a crop dusting scene. The boat chase was created in part to pay tribute to another young Broccoli-Maibaum film collaboration called The Red Beret. The helicopter chase was filmed with a radio-controlled miniature helicopter. Remember when film productions used miniatures? Good times, I tell you. The sounds of the boat chase were replaced in post-production since the boats were not loud enough, and the explosion, which was shot at Pinewood, managed to get out of hand, burning actor Walter Gotell's eyelids and injuring 3 stuntmen. Fun fact and side note, Gotell plays Morzeni in this film, and would go on to play General Gogol later on in the Roger Moore run of films and into the Timothy Dalton era, another instance of an actor coming back to the series to play an entirely different character than what they had previously played. Principal photography for the film wrapped on August 23, 1963. From Russia with Love is the first film in the series with John Barry as the primary composer. The theme song was composed by Lionel Bart, who was known for the stage musical Oliver, itself an adaptation of the famous Charles Dickens story Oliver Twist. The theme song itself was sung by Matt Monro, played over the end credits of the film. The title credit music is a lively instrumental version of the tune beginning with Barry's brief James Bond is Back, which then segues into Monty Norman's James Bond theme. Monroe's vocal version is later played during the film as music on a radio, in addition to the end credits. Barry traveled with the crew of the film to Turkey in order to get musical influences from local music, but at the end of the day he ended up using almost nothing aside from local instruments, such as finger cymbals, to give the film an exotic feeling. He did this because he thought that Turkish music had a comedic tone that did not fit the dramatic feeling of the Bond films. One person considered for singing the title song was Frank Sinatra, but Sinatra turned down the part. Recalling his visit to Turkey, John Barry said, "It was like no other place I'd ever been in my life. The trip was supposedly to seep up the music, so Noel Rogers and I used to go around these nightclubs and listen to all this stuff. We had the strangest week, and we really came away with nothing, except a lot of ridiculous stories. We went back, talked to Lionel, and then he wrote From Russia With Love." As mentioned in one of the opening segments of this video, John Barry introduced the percussive theme 007, action music that came to be considered the secondary James Bond theme. Barry composed it to be lighter in nature, be more enthusiastic, and have a more adventurous tone in order to relax the audience. The arrangement appears twice on the soundtrack album. The second version, titled 007 Takes the Lecter, is the one used during the gunfight at the Gypsy Camp and during Bond's theft of the Lecter decoding machine. The completed film features a holdover from the Monty Norman supervised Dr. No music, as the post-rocket launch music from Dr. No is played in From Russia With Love during the helicopter and speedboat attacks. Photographer David Hearn was commissioned by the producers to shoot a series of stills with Sean Connery and the actresses. When the prop Walther PPK, Bond's signature weapon of choice, did not arrive, Hearn volunteered the idea of using his own Walther LP-53 air pistol. In posters for the film, and even on some home media releases, this is the reason why you see Bond holding the pistol with the long barrel, as opposed to the PPK. Though the photographs of the James Bond is Back posters of the US release airbrushed out the long barrel of the pistol, film poster artist Renato Fertini used the long-barreled pistol for his drawings of Connery on the British posters. From Russia With Love premiered on October 10, 1963 at the Odeon Leicester Square in London. Ian Fleming, Sean Connery, and Walter Gotell attended the premiere. The following year, it was released in 16 countries worldwide, with the United States premiere on October 8, 1964, at New York's Astor Theater. Upon its release, From Russia With Love doubled Dr. No's gross by earning $12.5 million at the worldwide box office opening weekend, equating to $127 million in today's currency. After a reissue, it grossed $78 million, $24 million of which came from North America. It was the most popular movie at the British box office in 1963. The film, like Dr. No, will go on to be released on various home media formats, like VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, and its eventual 4K Ultra release later this year to be included with the 007, the Sean Connery collection, coming to 4K disc this June in North America. The film's cinematographer Ted Moore won the BAFTA Award and the British Society of Cinematographers Award for Best Cinematography. At the 1965 Laurel Awards, Lotte Lenya stood third for Best Female Performance, and the film secured second place for Best Action Drama. The film's title song was also nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Original Song. Contemporary reviews described the film as fun, fast-moving, and full of nonsense that is tongue-in-cheek and will undoubtedly make a fortune. Later reviews have been much more positive, with a score of 97% on Rotten Tomatoes and 83 out of 100 on Metacritic. The consensus on Rotten Tomatoes states the second James Bond film, From Russia With Love, is a razor-sharp, briskly paced Cold War thriller that features several electrifying action scenes. Many fans of the series hold this one in high regard, being one of the highest-rated Bond movies on the user site IMDb, with the accrued user score of a 7.3 out of 10. In terms of my brief thoughts, From Russia With Love is a quintessential Bond film, one of the best of the classic era of Bond. I do think this moves a bit too slow in some parts, but the filmmakers are essentially pros at making these, having already made one before. The action is razor sharp and has a really fun climax with the boat chase. The Orient Express segment is a little bit long, but the entirety of that segment and Bond stealing the Lecter are definitely the highlights of the film for me. From Russia with Love is so iconic and such a classic within the series that many associated with the series later on, like Daniel Craig and Sam Mendes, have stated this is their personal favorite of the series, as well as Sean Connery's personal favorite of the Bond films he made. Barbara Broccoli, Michael G. Wilson, and future Bond actor Timothy Dalton would also state this as their favorite Bond film. Albert R. Broccoli listed this in The Spy Who Loved Me as one of his top 3 favorites, explaining that he felt it was with this film that the Bond style and formula were perfected. As stated before, the film would be used in screen tests for future Bond films when casting the leading Bond girl, with actors and actresses standing in for Bond and Tatiana during the hotel scene. So that about does it for this production history. This was one that I was really looking forward to, considering the legacy. Wait. Legacy. Speaking of legacy, there's a reason this film has stood the test of time. There's another thing regarding the legacy of this movie. Let's jump ahead just over 40 years later to the mid-2000s. Let's briefly talk about that, shall we? In 2005, a video game adaptation based on From Russia with Love was developed by Electronic Arts and released on November 1st, 2005. It follows the storyline of both the film and the book, albeit with some scene changes to make it more accessible for gamers and to make the game more action-oriented. One of the most significant changes to the story is the replacement of the terrorist organization Spectre with Octopus because of the long-running legal battle with Kevin McClory, which had yet to be resolved. Most of the cast from the film returned, including Sean Connery, who not only lent his likeness to the game, but also recorded all new dialogue for the game, despite being in his 70s at that time. This was strange, to say the least. Put it this way. Remember in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, when they de-aged Indy at the beginning of the film, so we were looking at a young Harrison Ford, but every time he spoke, it was old 80-year-old Harrison Ford's voice, and the two really didn't mesh all that well together? Yeah, that's kind of the same thought I have here with this game, especially since Sean Connery was older recording this, and his S's and H's sound different from when he was younger. It is just a bit jarring looking at young Sean Connery and hearing old Sean Connery's voice. I guess it's that same effect it had for me many years later in Dial of Destiny with Harrison Ford. With that aside, the game was third person, much like the previous game, Everything or Nothing, and featured a third-person multiplayer deathmatch mode, and also depicts several elements of later Bond films, such as the Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger, and the jetpack from Thunderball. The game was written by Bruce Fierstein, who had previously worked on the film scripts for GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and the game Everything or Nothing. The game was very similar in gameplay to Everything or Nothing, and was released to mixed or average reviews among critics, with praise given to the enhanced graphics and play difficulty, but criticism towards the lack of innovation from the previous game. Many associated with the game expressed disappointment in its average reviews, or reflected on the fact that it felt like a rushed product, unable to deliver the true vision of the game. But many were happy that Connery came back to the role after many years, and found it to be a fitting swan song for Connery in the role of James Bond 007. So there you have it. That's From Russia with Love. Definitely a quintessential Bond film. I also just want to say, well, looking back at all these movies and how they were made, I know we are only too deep into this 25 film series, but now that Amazon has full creative control of the franchise, and that really saddens me and has broken me as a human being, and will probably find some ridiculous way to screw it all up, I think I've gained a deeper love and appreciation for the series than I already had, especially for the films that I love, and even the Bond films that I don't necessarily like or even hate. With both Dr. No and From Russia with Love now covered, it gives me and everyone watching a deeper understanding as to how these movies are made and all the hard work, passion, and dedication from the cast and crew to make these things possible. With how much they went through on this production, trying to work around crew overturn and unfortunate circumstances involving members of the cast, it really opens your eyes as to just how hard they work to make these movies and get them off the ground. And unfortunately, unless if somebody is put in place of these movies like Barbara Broccoli or Michael G. Wilson and has that mindset, I don't think that will ever happen under Amazon leadership. I just wanted to bring that up since this is the first Bond production history I've done since the Amazon Eon deal was announced, and I started writing this before that deal was announced. It makes me really excited, though, to get into our next production history for the Bond series. Well, I would be talking about Goldfinger, a bona fide classic. Thank you, as always, for watching. This is Q Branch, signing off. Don't touch that! That's my lunch.